All right. It looks like we are live. Mike, how's it going?
It's going great. Happy New Year, Dan.
Thanks. Same to you. How is your holiday season?
Well, I think it was really good from a Goliath standpoint. I'm not sure we talked about this last time, but we do this holiday hours thing where it's kind of like work when you can, don't when you can't, and there's no stand-up regular meetings or sprint goals. And
Mhm.
that was awesome because I had like at least five or six things on my list that I wanted to get to, and I got to them all.
That is awesome. I was also doing some things that one of which we'll talk about today, but I was also just spending part of my time watching your incredible demos that were coming in Slack. So I was unfortunately doing less hardware focused things. Um, so I was kind of living vicariously through you, I think. But what are some of the things for the folks at home?
Oh
What
yeah.
were some of the things that you were looking into over break?
Well, so when we see people using interesting hardware, the DevRel team usually likes to pick up one of them and make it work with Goliath because it just tends to open doors when we talk to prospective customers and they're like, does Goliath work on X? And you're like, yes, we've done that before. So we were at Embedded World last year I think in March. And we had meetings with our partners over at Espressif and we went to their booth and they had these little ESP box like almost consumer good with kind of a largish screen. I don't know, like a 2.8-inch screen or something like that, touch screen and all that stuff, and ESP32S3 in it. And so I bought one like that week, maybe from Germany, and never opened the package. But so I got that up and running on Goliath. Those are unfortunately out of stock right now, but we'll see
Oh,
if they come back into stock because they are cool. They have like on a couple PMOD slots on the back, and you can do a bunch of stuff. And then M5 Stack Core 2 is, I don't know if it's a newer board. It's kind of like newer to me, but that is like a little bit smaller, but also all encapsulated. That one has a battery in it and it ships with a shield that has like an accelerometer on it. It's got the touchscreen on it.
ooh,
And
nice.
it's got a speaker in it. It's just like generally a cool device. So I got the ESP box working with our ESP IDF SDK. And then I got the M5 Stack Core 2 working with our Zephyr SDK because Zephyr just added mainline support to that. And exciting to me, I discovered a problem with the board definition in Zephyr, and it's like a one-line fix, but it just got approved. So there'll be a
Awesome.
code fix in Zephyr for that as well.
Awesome. Well, nice work. The ESP box, what's the SoC in that one?
I think both of these are ESP32S3. So that's
Okay,
kind of like the
gotcha.
new hotness for ESP32 chips. Although for Dan, it's the C3
Yeah,
because it's got the RISC-V core,
yeah,
but
and now the
which also
C6.
works with Goliath. The C6. No, I don't have that one. Have you used that one at all?
No, I don't have one. I think they might be somewhat difficult to get a hold of right now.
Are they like
Um,
engineering samples right now or something?
yeah, I don't know. I need to double check. Last time, so when they were did they come out last year? I think it was last year. Maybe beginning of last year. Um or spring of last year, maybe. I don't know. Whenever I initially looked, I was having trouble finding one, and so then I just never looked again. But I saw someone just like somewhere in one of my feeds who had built a cool project with one, and that kind of brought it back top to mind. But um, that sounds like some really interesting projects, though.
Yeah, other hardware stuff. So we're going to open source the Ostentus, which is that faceplate that we've shown before that has the e-paper on it. And you are looking at the code because we hacked it for SuperCon. I think we demonstrated on the last live stream. And you had asked when you're looking at the code, you're like, why are we using PIOs for I squared C? And I was
Yeah.
like, I know there's a reason, but I can't remember. And then when I went and looked at it during holiday hours, it's because the Pico SDK didn't have I squared C peripheral support in it when we wrote
Oh.
the firmware for that. So I also during holiday hours updated that to use the hardware I squared C, which is a breath of fresh. I mean, PIOs are awesome and they are
Yeah.
hardware technically, but like if you've got this dedicated peripheral just sitting there not using it, it's kind of a sad thing. So,
Yeah.
but enough about my projects. I'm very excited about your projects. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you were working on?
Yeah, sure. Well, like I said, I'm always wanting to touch more hardware, but I was not doing hardware things, but I was pretending I was, you might say, for a little bit of time. So in addition to like the holiday hours that Mike mentioned already, we have hack days. Allegedly once a quarter, but sometimes I don't know what the
Twice a
cadence
year.
is. Yeah, something like that. And at one of the hack days last year, Dylan and I worked on, and Dylan's our product manager here at Goliath, worked on a simulator, or kind of like you might say like a mock device. I think, I don't remember exactly what we called it in the browser at that time. So that's what we were working on then. So Dylan basically did some front end work because he has background as a front end engineer, to kind of put kind of like a in browser device UI together. And then I was doing some back end things to support that. So that was a lot of fun. And that has actually, some of the pieces of that have become components of a number of different parts of our stack. One of the things that's interesting about that is that we have two sets of APIs in Goliath. We have what you might call our like admin API, where you're all the things that you do in the console, right? We have a REST API that backs all of that. So if you want to upload a firmware blob, or you want to create a release, or you want to create a new device or something like that, those are all HTTP REST APIs.
And you say admin APIs, just to be clear, these are available to everyone. It's not like they're only the
Right.
staff. Like, yeah.
Right, exactly. I think a management API might be a
There
better,
you go. Yeah.
a better word for it. Unless if you're a read-only user, in which case you cannot
Yeah.
do mutation operation. But
If
yeah,
you're a member
great
of an
point.
organization as a read-only user, right?
Yeah, exactly. So all of our device APIs, though, which are how our devices send data, it's all the cool hardware work that Mike does, or firmware work. That's how the data gets from those devices up to the cloud. They use CoApp, which we've written about on our blog and talked about quite a bit. And that's really great for a lot of the scenarios that we're using. Unfortunately, using UDP from the browser is a little bit more challenging / not possible in some cases. It depends on, there's some edge cases that'll work, but you can't use CoApp directly from the browser. And we've also kind of thought about offering other protocols and that sort of thing. Actually, before I even joined Goliath, we previously at one point had MQTT support. So in order to kind of make this work in the browser, we needed HTTP endpoints. So I've been doing some work on the back end of the to add HTTP support. And the way we did it is going to have some more exciting things coming because of the architecture we put in place there. But it also enabled us to actually make this simulator a real thing. So I'll actually share my screen here and we can take a peek at it. We launched it yesterday. So let's see if I can find the Chrome tab here. Looks like it's coming through. So this is the Goliath console here. And we kind of went from this idea of this being a device in the browser to thinking about it more as still emulating a device in a way, but it's more about data simulation. What we're trying to do is break down the barriers between developing firmware and developing the services that are consuming data from devices that kind of make your product that you're building on top of Goliath. And one of the reasons for that is we have very different development life cycles on either side of Goliath. So with hardware and firmware, there can be really long development life cycle. And then on the software side, or the cloud side, you might say, you might be moving a lot faster and wanting to iterate quickly. And really what you want to do is just kind of be pushing data through Goliath that mimics what you're going to be eventually seeing from devices. In that case, you're not actually trying to necessarily like execute your firmware in an emulated environment. You're just trying to send data. So as part of that, we did some work to take that kind of hack project and turn it into a version of a simulator that we have now today. So I took inspiration from Dylan's work and dropped this in here. So on the device page in the console now, we have this simulator, and you can put your PSK ID and PSK in, which I'll go ahead and do quickly here. So I'll grab a PSK for this device, and then also the PSK ID, and we can drop that in. And this is just going to send whatever payloads you have here to LightDB stream. So I'm going to hop that open here, and then I'll set auto refresh to real time just so we can see the data coming in as I send it. And this is going to now send payloads that you can see in LightDB Stream, and also see, this is a lot of times more consequential for some of our users, see this flow through to output streams. So we can see that exact value there. And you can change this to be whatever you want. We can make this, hello world if we want, and send that. And once again, see that come through. This is obviously pretty bare bones here, but we're excited about just having this interface available in the console and getting feedback from customers, and kind of being able to drop this wherever we want across our Goliath properties, to be able to exercise some different things. We have some feature ideas already in mind, but definitely looking forward to getting requests from folks.
And Dan, this came out looking so nice. I got to say, like, there was a magician's like nothing up my sleeve moment when you were looking at not at the list of devices, because that little Goliath icon on the bottom right is not there. But when you open up the device view, then you get it. And so you can send this from several different devices. Like, it's not just one device. You showed the PSK ID. If you change that, then you can simulate having different devices in the fleet. And I think you had talked about some repeatability to this. Is that kind of on the roadmap, like getting it to send data on a cadence?
Yeah, that's a great point. So obviously here, I am manually invoking it every time, but kind of similar, somewhat inspired by our refresh periods here. You could also imagine here just us popping open saying, hey, send this payload every 5 seconds. So that's one of the things that's top of mind for us. Another is being able to do what I've kind of been referring to as fleet simulation. So obviously we can switch which device we're sending as by putting in different credentials, but you may also want to, run some type of experiment where you're saying, hey, I want, all of my devices or 10 of my devices or something like that to send data every 5 minutes. And that more simulates what your deployed fleet would look like. And so that's another thing that's upcoming as well.
So I'm just dropping a link in the comments. I don't know if that does a lower third thing. I guess I'm not sure how to use StreamYard all that well, but if you look at the comments, there's a link to the blog post. Oh, you must have to click it or something.
Yep.
So Dan wrote a great blog post on this if you want to kind of go deeper on it. I know you and I have discussed this before and have differences of agreements, but I love this tool because I will oftentimes write the firmware last. So I would want to make sure, like, I'll think to myself, okay, I have these sensors or I have this other data that I want to send to LightDB Stream. I'll oftentimes put that into the packet that I think I'm going to send, and then use like the CoAP tool, which is a command line tool, in order to send that. But then I always have to go and look up the CoAP syntax, and you still have to get, PSK ID in there. So this is just like a lot easier route to that. And that's because I think often the mistake that I make is I'll have a malformed JSON that I'm doing, because I usually do like a printf style string substitution in order to format JSON. There is a JSON library in Zephyr, but I don't pull out the big guns unless I really need them. But now, instead of like opening up DuckDuckGo and typing in JSON validator, I can just like plop it in here to the Goliath console and then immediately see it come up and be like, oh yeah, that looks the way I thought it should. That'll be fine in my firmware. And then I go off and program the device.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I will say I want to give a shout out to so this interface here. If I just type in hello or something like that, actually get a hint here that it expected a JSON object. That is not any ingenuity of mine. I didn't build a language server in the browser. This is just Monaco, which is the same kind of like editor engine used in VS Code. But since it's all JavaScript, right, you can run it in the browser. So definitely taking advantage of some nice validation features there. I think another thing you and I talked about, Mike, was we also allow you to send CBOR. And so like I'm very interested in potentially having like a hex editor or something like that in here, or just saying, probably the more ideal situation is you put your JSON and say, hey, send this as CBOR, right? Convert it for me.
I have spent some time troubleshooting CBOR problems, and it's always me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, hopefully get some more of those things in. Once again, this is like just kind of an interface that we have now that we can continue to work with. So if folks have feedback, send it our way. Um, the other thing you kind of brought to mind there about kind of like building the firmware last. One of the things I feel like I've kind of learned from you and from Sam as well, who's our firmware lead at Goliath, is just kind of how to think about the value of emulation and simulation and virtualization in embedded development. I feel like a lot of times there is this you can kind of like get caught in no man's land a little bit, or no person's land, um, when trying to get to emulation. And what we're doing here is like very much saying we're not trying to be your firmware here. We have a very specific goal of simulating the data flowing through. And I think not trying, like going as far away from trying to emulate the firmware is actually providing a lot of value, which I feel like is something I kind of learned from y'all about like when what kind of value different types of emulation or simulation provide. And it does feel like that no person's land in the middle is kind of an area you want to stay out of.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right. Oh, Sam's watching, and he says
Yeah.
he's nodding vigorously. So I think you're right too. You're talking about like output streams. So like I've been in that situation before where like we've done a lot of work in Grafana for our visualizations, and we connect that through
WebSockets.
socket. Yeah, WebSockets. And you know, you need data coming in. And so like you're working on that and you're like, is my device sending something weird? Am I not getting it from Goliath? Do I have something wrong? Like taking parts out of the system that's not working makes it a lot easier for you to like track those things down. So not having to set up a device in order to get like one data on one address that's getting pushed out through the WebSockets is like a really valuable thing for kind of tuning up those on one end or the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also from a kind of like a quick start or first run experience, you are really able to see like the full end to end of the platform. One of the things we've talked about, is like it's a, for most SaaS products, really important to make the like first 5 minutes really impactful for someone who's using the product. If you have hardware in the loop, that's really difficult, right? That's something I think that we talk about a lot. And there are just some kind of like fundamental barriers there. It's harder to do something in the physical world than it is to do it, on the internet. So I think just having this as a way to kind of understand more about how the Goliath platform works could be beneficial as well.
Yeah, I remember early 2022, probably, our friend Simon over at DataCake was doing some demoing of their platform and integration with Goliath. And so I ended up setting up a device and just having like in my living room for like 2 or 3 months or something, just sending my living room temperature like I think maybe every second. And at some point, we looked at server logs and it was like the device that had sent the most unique data points.
Yeah.
And really it was just to like demonstrate a visualization dashboard. And so, sure, you can do that. Like that's what Goliath does really well, is connect the devices to the internet. But now if you're just simulating the dashboard and the actual data isn't real, we have more options.
Yeah. That makes me think, I don't think we've already mentioned this, but also maybe like uploading a CSV or something like that with a bunch of data points in it. That could be
And it would cycle
really
through
key.
them and maybe
Mhm.
loop. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be great because I've done several GPS demos.
That's
And
exactly.
so
I
you
was
have to like
thinking
get
of
in the
yours.
car and
Yeah.
drive somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And we record you driving and then we can replay it whenever though. That's
Yeah.
really neat. Well, there's still a few hours left in this day, so we'll see. maybe
I know,
that'll be
like
there
that's
by
the
end of the
best
day.
part of this job is it's just like you can play. You can always find a playground somewhere in your work. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I know you've been working on some pretty big things this week as well, Mike, or really over a long period of time, but it's kind of coming to fruition maybe this week. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, we saved the exciting parts for this. So documentation. So Goliath has documentation. We've received many compliments on our documentation. However, we haven't been totally satisfied with it because of the layout of it. And so we kind of all got together. Starting with you, I want to say, like, if you're looking for ways to like make changes in your company, like Dan is like, I have an idea and here's a slide deck. And everyone's like, yeah, okay, interesting. And then when it came time for that idea, for us to do something about it, I was like, hey, months ago, Dan must have put a slide deck out. I went looked at his slide deck and already like a bunch of foundational work was there. So like, thank you. That was hugely helpful. And we basically have split before where we had like a hardware, firmware, and cloud sections to our documentation. I should be sharing. I mean, we could like preview this even though it's not merged yet.
Yeah,
So
this
let me
is
get
all
that
open
up.
source too. So
Yeah, I
I
mean,
love that
it's,
about our docs. That's
yeah.
so awesome. And people I think this has happened a few times. You would know better than me, but someone can be looking at our docs and be like, "Oh, I see something to fix," and they can just fix it themselves, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, pull requests welcome, and we have definitely had pull requests come in. So let's see. That looks right.
Yep,
Yeah.
looks good to me.
All right. So if we look at our live site right here, so we can see, and I just love the dark mode. I know Sam's watching, so I thought I'd say that. You can see that we have, our getting started, our hardware, firmware, cloud, and reference. And the problem is, like firmware to me is pretty obvious on where to look. Cloud, pretty obvious. I'm not sure like what should be hardware, what should be reference. It's just kind of like the flow of it doesn't feel quite right. And so we ended up resorting this, and I don't know if I can zoom in a little bit just for help on that. So we still have our firmware. You'll find the hardware section. So if you're missing a piece of the hardware, it's still under there. But our cloud has been kind of split into two different things. And so we have our device management, which are the services. We are missing our RPC service, which should be at the bottom here. That hasn't been merged yet. But looking at the different services, our logging, our over-the-air updates, our settings service, and then separating that out from the data that you want to do. So data has an application services, which is the kind of what we were talking about before, streaming data or having stateful data on here, and then all of our output streams. So if you want to connect to an existing platform, a database platform, or like your own server, or maybe if you have a customer app or whatever, like this is really where you want to look. So I think it kind of like centralizes that reference material. And then our getting started section does a little bit better job of like walking you through, well, first of all, like registering for the console, getting up and running and having your first devices there. But then we've started kind of small with our precompiled binary section. I'm not sure how much we've talked about that on here, but you can actually get a Thingy 91 and run a precompiled binary on it. We walk you through like how to put your credentials onto there and actually get it talking to Golioth. We'll be able to add more of these. And I think as we roll out our newest release of our firmware SDK, we're going to try and have more precompiled binaries that go along with that. And so I think you'll see this section expand greatly. And then for people that want to kind of dig in, we now have these different guides for the different platforms that we support. So we support Zephyr, we support NCS, which is the NRF Connect SDK, which is the Nordic flavor of Zephyr. Sorry, I always trip over that one. ESP-IDF, and then there should be a Modus Toolbox guide here as well that hasn't been merged. And these are everything. So it's like, how do you actually set up Zephyr and get Golioth in there as a module, and then the actual flashing of samples, because our device SDKs have a bunch of granular samples. So you can go and see like each service, just what needs to go in to use that sort of thing.
Awesome. This is looking great. I absolutely love this reorganization. Was there any things that I know there was some redirects and things of that nature? Any kind of like I feel like you have a lot of documentation migration wisdom. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the harder parts of doing this migration and maybe some of the techniques you learned?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. When you move these whole sections around, like we have pretty good search engine results for our documentation. And I love Zephyr, but my biggest beef for Zephyr early on is the documents, when you searched for them, would pull up old versions of the documents. And I wanted to avoid, they've done a great job of fixing that. It's much better now, but I wanted to avoid that happening. Like I don't want you to search for like Golioth stateful data or something and get a link to a page that says not found. And so The way to do that is mostly for search engines to do 301 redirects, which tells the search engine, hey, this has been permanently moved from one place to the other place. But we do that through Firebase, which is where our hosting is being done. And you need to have like this kind of esoteric glob-based syntax of the URL you were trying to get and then the URL you want to redirect to. And it is not totally clear how their parser works or like which parser their works. So I actually wrote just a kind of rudimentary Python script that parses the way that I think Firebase is parsing. And I took the sitemap from the live site and the sitemap from the biggest PR of my life that we're going to be merging probably Monday. And I have it just compare the two, and it looks to see, and it'll tell you every redirect link, which I put in the PR, and then every link that's broken, which is just most at this point, I think it's just because my parser doesn't do things right. Like for instance, Docusaurus has a blog feature and we never turned it off, even though we have a blog on a different site. So redirecting any incoming links to /blog to our blog.goliath.io site, stuff like that.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Is the I haven't looked closely enough yet. Is the Python script going into the repo, or is it just kind of like a local thing that you have?
It's in the repo. So there's a scripts folder, and please don't judge me. It was done quickly. And I was like, well, we're probably only going to need this one time, but I was like, we'll probably need it more than one time. I better commit it. But all you have to do is put the sitemap that you're comparing to in the same folder, and then make sure you do a Docusaurus run build. So that there's a build folder with the new sitemap in it, and it finds that automatically and compares the two.
Awesome. That's really cool. Yeah, I was thinking that could either be something that like we could use in CI at some point, or other folks might want to take a look at. So that's really cool.
Yeah, the good thing, I mean, there's a lot of good things about reorganizing and that sort of thing, but kind of like one of the tangential benefits of this is I found a lot of really funky stuff. Like there's a front matter on the files in Docusaurus where you can do like the title and you can do like the sidebar ordering, and but you can also do a slug. And I hate that slug option, because what it does is Docusaurus, if you haven't used it before, is like markdown based and it's folder hierarchy. So you have a folder, it'll make that a subdirectory on your URL, and then the files in it, it'll use the file names as the page names. But if you put the slug value in the front matter, it'll override all of that. And so just yesterday I was trying, I was like double checking that all of the redirects work. And I found one where we have virtual devices on the summary page. So it's like hardware, virtual devices, and then the summary. But then if you go to a sub page within there, it changes virtual devices to virtual device without the S. And it's because the folder doesn't have the S, but the summary page has a slug that includes the S. And it just kind of like took me a while to figure. I'm like, what? Why isn't this redirect working? And those S's are really on the end of words are really hard for your human brain to catch. And and when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, all right, now that's what that is.
Yeah. There's it seems like there's a ton of little things like that could get you that you worked through for all of our benefits. So we're very appreciative. I think this new update looks awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, me too. I really, we got the new theme colors with our rebranding, and did a bunch of updates on that, and those are looking really good. And then just honestly had a ton of good ideas from everyone I talked to on like how to arrange things. And I think it's never going to be a fully cooked souffle, right? It's always going to be somewhere in the middle, but this is much closer to like a version that is intuitively laid out.
Yeah, very, very much agreed. We're talking about two things that we are shipping or have shipped imminently. We are also talking before we jumped on air today about kind of like our theme for this quarter being shipping season, and we've I think we deploy a lot, right? We are always rolling out fixes and updates and things like that. And we have a change log in our console where you can see stuff. But there's a few kind of like bigger efforts that we've been working on for like a while. And some of them are like the ones that we've chatted about today, but there's also even larger ones that we're kind of looking at shipping this quarter that have been in the works for a long time that we're really excited about. But I was just wondering kind of like, from your perspective, I think this is like a really exciting time when you get to like see a bunch of things that have been long running come to fruition. But I was just kind of curious about kind of your feeling about that theme, and if there's
Yeah.
anything you're particularly excited for without disclosing too much about what might be coming.
Oh no, we can disclose everything. We're all friends here,
Yeah.
right? Everyone. Yeah. So
This is a private
Dylan,
stream, right?
yeah, right. So Dylan, I think, is the one who came up with the label of shipping season, and I think that's. I mean, because really, we did fourth quarter was like a ton of like not sprint work towards these larger initiatives, and now they're all kind of like lining up. And so we have are you calling it device simulator or data simulator? Did we?
We per marketing at launch, it is just the Golioth Simulator.
This is the
So
Goliath simulator.
which I
All right.
actually kind of
So
like because we are like exercising the Goliath platform. Also,
right.
it gives us some open-endedness to evolve it over time. But yep, that's what we're
Yeah, so
calling
I
it.
mean that's the first one to drop. I mean this docs is a big change, so that one's going to come. Like I alluded to earlier, we have a pretty big release that will be cut soon on the firmware SDK. We have new hardware designed for the demos that we do that is very close to going prime time and coming for open source. Open source is a big virtue in this company. And so it's really nice to see that some of these things that we've been showing off, which are custom hardware, are going to be open as well. So people can take a look at them if you need a place to start on your IoT designs or want to do your own conference demos or just think the hardware is cool. And there's a very big cloud data thing that I won't and these are just like the big ones. I mean, there's a ton of little ones out as well, and I think you're going to see these all in like the next 7 weeks, but it might be just this quarter. But I think we have ambitious timelines in mind, and that makes things very exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. The the big cloud thing is what we'll refer to it on these streams henceforth until it's released. But yeah, all those things should be really exciting. And I'm particularly excited. I mean, obviously, there's been work going into the firmware SDK for a while, but just kind of like centralizing and have this one. What did Dylan call it? The one SDK to rule them all, right? I'm excited about that. I think it's just going to be more straightforward, and also, from a little bit of an outsider perspective, as I don't work on the firmware quite as much as you, the just centralizing effort towards
Yeah.
infrastructure around it and that sort of thing seems like a big win for us from a velocity perspective.
Yeah, and that's looking really good. That's all open source as well. So like if you want to go and dig through and see the development that has been happening, we might want to talk about this like GitHub etiquette as well, like looking at how the docs merge versus like the firmware SDK merge. They're like different takes at it, and I see virtue to both. But we talked on this stream, I'm sure, about the beta release of Zephyr support in the firmware SDK. So like that is obviously the thing that we're working towards most right now, but there's a ton of other improvements in there that I think are really impactful. And I think people are going to, I hope people are going to be excited about, right? Like I'm excited about them. And so I think I project that onto everyone else, but yeah, those are coming and it feels good.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about some GitHub etiquette. What is the tell me about the different merge processes or practices and some of the virtues you see in both.
Well, so I think there are probably like accepted names for these approaches to how you use GitHub, but I don't know them. Maybe you know them. Like one that we're using is you develop everything on tip of main, you do PRs to merge into it, and then you cut releases as the work gets done. But another one is to have a separate like develop branch and to merge into that develop branch and then to merge that into main at the time of the release. Like have you worked on either or both of these in the past?
Yeah, I've done both of them. And I generally I think there are names for them. I know one is called GitFlow, but I can never remember which one is which. When I was working on a large open source project, we used the former one that you mentioned there. Everything's on tip of main, and then you do branches for every minor release, and then you do patches on those branches. And if you're doing something where you have long-term support or anything like that, that's definitely my preferred model for development there. However, I've also done and at Goliath do a lot of work on cloud services, and actually since I joined, we've changed the way that we've developed. And in that mode, I'm very much a fan of like everything is tip of main. And as soon as you every like second that you're waiting between from when you've merged to main and when it's been deployed for production is like liability, right? We should be deploying every single time, and every time you merge, that should be a deployable unit, right? You should never be in a broken state. So in that case, it's really, I guess, neither of those, right? We're just saying like it's always to main. And then there's obviously the case where if you need to do like roll back and potentially do a hot fix, you can always have a hot fix branch, and then you get back to main once you have that fix on main as well. So those are kind of my two preferences. But there's also, you mentioned, having the develop branch and merging it in where you have longer running, multiple long running branches, I guess, in that case.
Yeah, and I think some of the, I guess, liabilities on having that tip of main be the development branch is like I generally will just check out a repo to tip of main, and then I'm trying to get better at like looking at it and being like, when was the last release? Does it seem near enough that I want to use the release and make sure that I don't get something else? But that philosophy that like every commit should be a deployable commit is like a really good one. Like if you're making breaking changes, they shouldn't happen across multiple commits. Like the thing that you break should also be fixed in the same commit. So no matter where you check out, you can still build and run the thing. So for the docs, since we didn't want to go live with all these huge changes because of the redirects, we have a development branch that we kind of play around in, and we cleaned that up and synced it with main, and then started making all of the commits. But it's been hundreds of commits into there, and hundreds of files, maybe 1,000 files moved in this as well. And so yesterday, I think I finally got everything in that should have been in, and I opened up a PR into main, and it's like an unreviewable PR now because it's just so far away. And so I wonder, if you're doing development like this, like what is the approach to reviewing a PR from a feature branch that has already been, each thing has already been merged in and reviewed, and then getting the feature branch merged? Like, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if it's a large enough reorg like this, you're relying a lot on like the individual kind of like if you have a main and a develop, and then you have features off of the develop, you're kind of relying on like your reviews on the develop for when you merge into main. But I mean, in general, I think, like docs are, I don't know, docs are a very interesting case because it's, or any static side, I guess, where you're making a big change, you kind of have some unavoidable big diffs if you're going to do a big reorg. But in general, I think in other things, and I guess in docs to some extent, always striving for like small PRs is kind of like the recipe for success there. But obviously, if you have reorganization of static pages, that's not really an option.
Yeah. So if you are on our docs and see something weird starting at the beginning of next week or now, feel free to open an issue. Like we see those issues right away, and we'll get that fixed. Or if you want to do a PR, you're certainly welcome. We've had several people do that, and it's always helpful. I think for this one though, we're not reviewing granularly. We're really just looking at like, are the sections that we moved in the places that we want them to be? Because we only want to deal with this like redirect issue one time if we can. As we move forward on this, it should be incremental updates, like adding pages, possibly renaming pages. But we can also it's easier to do redirects when it's like one page gets moved. And so we'll see how it goes. It is exciting though.
Yeah, one of the things that also came to mind when you were talking about like your default being like checking out main when you're on a new project, it made me think about like your Git strategy should also be influenced by not just having deployable units, but what your deployable unit is. So like for cloud, right, we are usually, our deployable unit is an OCI image and a Helm chart is typically what we're doing. And so people aren't really like consuming directly. Consumers of whatever we're building are not going to our Git repo to like use the thing, right? They're pulling our latest image or something like that, and so it can be obvious. And also, if you're even if you're doing like a library, but you have a higher level language with a package manager that automatically resolves like the latest tag or something like that, then you're also free to do that kind of like tip of main development. In fact, that open source project I was referencing, it was a Go project, right? So we would have our minor release branches and patches, and if someone did go get the library and incorporate it, then they would just get the latest release, right, automatically, even though
Right.
we use tip of main development. But with C, right, you are typically cloning the repo or pulling it in as a Git submodule, or perhaps using something like West to pull it in, right?
Yeah.
And so it is much more common to just like go to Git and pull it down with whatever is there.
Yeah, so I'm a little behind this week. I actually meant to write a blog post kind of about this topic because one of the things I mentioned the M5 stack before, I was working on that and I wanted to make a standalone uh, repository for it that wasn't
Hmm.
like in the Zephyr tree, and I did that, and then I went to use the accelerometer, and I'm like, I can't issue the build command for the shield. Like, what's going on here? And it's because I'm locked to version 3.5.0 of Zephyr. And about 5 commits after that release was cut, they added the board definition for the shield, the accelerometer shield that comes with the M5 stack. And
Mm.
so then I looked at it and I'm like, well, how do I cherry pick? Like, you would have to do like a West update and then like manually go in and cherry pick the commit that you wanted. So what I ended up doing then is in my manifest, I split off Golioth and stopped importing the dependencies from Golioth, and then I pulled Zephyr in separately and imported from the hash instead of the release version of it. So I think that having those branches available is great. It's wonderful if you're doing a release like that. But the cool thing about having an open repository like this, and like Zephyr has and like NCS has, is if you need something that's in the development, you can take it upon you can take the responsibility yourself to be like, I'm going to go to a little bit newer version, and then I'm going to check and make sure that everything is still working the way I expect it to, just to get those features.
Yeah. Do you usually I mean, I know, so I think there's three main ways, right, which they recommend or outline which you can use Zephyr with West, right, to pull things in. Um and I think, a lot of times people just do they pull Zephyr down for every project, right? And they use a separate workspace for every project. Is that usually the pattern that you take?
Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes I'll do a demo for a customer, and then, you know, you deliver the demo, there's oohs and ahs, and maybe you don't hear back from that customer. And then, like 4 months later, they're like, "We've been building on this, and we're having this problem." And so, can you even get the demo to build anymore? Well, if you make a standalone repository that has its own tree and has a manifest file that specifies that, then you can like always get back to there. Which is the way I like doing it. I mean, I guess the other way, if you wanted to have just like one Zephyr tree, you could make a West manifest that points to wherever that tree is, and
Hmm.
does a tag, and it'll reset that tree and check it out to where it is. So there are approaches to it, but my general feeling is when you're committing a project, I mean, it's like Node. You know exactly what version of every package of Node, because there's usually like a package lock file in there. I think every project should have some kind of package lock type of system that lets you know where all the dependencies were the last time you built it, just for sanity.
Hmm. Yeah. I have I I've moved more towards doing what you're talking about. Uh Another strategy that I've used, which I don't think is recommended necessarily, but is I had basically a directory called workspaces, and I just had, every time I needed a specific Zephyr version, I would just create a new directory and check out the one commit for that Zephyr version, and then I'd never change it, and I always just use paths to specify, and the directory name would either be a tag or a commit hash, and then I would use that to reference the Zephyr tree. The issue with that is if you're pulling in a bunch of modules, you can either take the strategy of like, I'm going to do all of the modules every time. So like I'm going to do the Zephyr checkout,
Yeah.
right? And then all of the modules for whatever is pinned in the Zephyr manifest there. And then if you start to mess with modules, right, then you're starting to influence other projects. So there are drawbacks to it. But I did find if I'm like doing a bunch of projects or something like that with like Zephyr 3.5 or something like that, it could reduce the number of times I need to check it out. But you could also do that with a multi-application or multi-project or whatever workspace. So there's a seems to be a plethora of ways to get it done.
Yeah, and I think finding the way that works for you is more important than listening to what I have to say.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, really, like I've landed on the thing that I can count on and I remember how to do and I like is familiar to me. And I think if you can get yourself to that point, then you're gonna, be free running.
Yeah. I've also started to experiment a little bit with just invoking CMake directly rather than using West for builds, which is not actually too crazy of a thing to do. At first I was like, this is probably a bad path, which I've been known to go down with some firmware things. But I kind of liked it just from understanding a little more what was going on. But then I also I use the verbose flag on builds a lot when using West. And so it will, print out every step. So like every object file that it's compiling and then all the linking steps and that sort of thing. And that's helped me learn a little bit more about, what it's doing behind the scenes, which is nice.
Is that verbose flag when you call CMake directly or using West?
Using West. You can just do a
Okay.
West bill. Is it -V? I have it up
Oh, that's
here.
interesting. I got to try that because one of the things that I've been unhappy about, like for instance, if you do a West Flash and the board's not ready or doesn't work, it'll tell you the command that it tried to run but failed. But
Yeah.
if you do a West Flash and it works, it won't tell you the command that it tried to run. And that drives me crazy. It's like, show me what you're doing, buddy.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that is the exact thing I was running into. In fact, I actually started I can't remember what the macro is, but where you can just like the macro is just like fail to build basically. And I would just like put that in a random header file to start getting more information about what's happening. But this is I'll paste it in here. I just grabbed this from one of my terminals here
Oh,
where I was
cool.
building one of the samples. But yeah, that -V in front of build there will cause it to print out everything, which is really nice. And so anyway, if folks are interested in about what it's doing behind the scenes, also one of the things that we talked about 2 days ago, yesterday, I don't remember when it was, but was all of the CMake modules that are in Zephyr. Because you were talking about the code relocation functionality.
Oh, yeah.
And I had gotten into that because I was looking at how it looked for the architecture directories and the SOC directories, and then also got into it when it was deciding how to resolve to toolchain, because by default, you're using the Zephyr toolchain bundle. Or
Mhm.
why is it called SDK-NG? What does the NG stand for?
I don't know. And then we talk about it and we're like, install the Zephyr SDK. And it's
Yeah.
like, is that the tree or is that the toolchain package? I'm confused as well.
Okay, but by default, it's using that. But you can also direct it to use like your local LLVM or your local GCC or something like that. And so anyway, you can really get deep into the CMake modules there and see all of the magic that's happening. And sometimes, as we discovered when looking at the code relocation, or maybe you had already seen it, but it's just invoking Python to do some things
Yeah.
along the way.
And I never got that code relocation to work. I ran out of DRAM and IRAM on the ESP32S3. That was the M5 stack project. I wanted to do some extra special stuff, which is totally not work related, but just rabbit hole related. So I'll nerd snipe you at some point. We could go down there. But I wanted to talk to you about one other thing before we run out of time here. Over Christmas, I was on Hacker News and I was like reading the #1 headline and I'm like, that's Dan's blog post. And then I think maybe like the same day or the next day, something was on the first page and you submitted it. So like, tell us about your worldwide popularity.
I don't know about that, but every once in a while, one of my blog posts will pop up on there. I don't. This was close to, I think, my most points I had gotten on one of my own. I've had a couple submissions where it's gotten up into like the high hundreds. I frequently, this is a, oh, Sam just weighed in. Zephyr SDK is based on Cross Tool NG, which is Cross Tool, the next generation. Classic open source, but why is that? But anyway, I a lot of times, are you familiar with Julia Evans?
I'm not. No.
Okay, so she is so cool. She makes like comics sort of about programming, and also writes incredible blog posts where she very much takes kind of like a ground up approach to exploring different like common technologies. Like she has a bunch on Git recently and that sort of thing. So I frequently am just like seeing her posts that I absolutely love and just post them there, and then they get upvoted a ton. But in this one case, my own got upvoted, which was cool. This was part of, outside of the simulator, I did have some, I mean, the simulator is very fun to work on, but I did have some strictly personal enjoyment projects during the holidays as well. And one of them, I won't go into full detail, but it was related to WebAssembly, and I was looking a bunch at Zephyr toolchains and architectures. So you can take from that what you will. But yeah, so as part of that, typically when I'm doing something, I really like to get deep into it. So I thought it'd be interesting to just take a look at. I've looked at ELF files a lot, and other kind of executables. So I thought I'd look at what a WebAssembly module has in it. And I had a small enough one that I thought, hey, why not just look at every byte in it? I think my favorite part of it, which this is totally like a file format nerd kind of thing, but when I was originally kind of looking at the spec, the WebAssembly spec, and then looking at the hex dump of the module that I had, it wasn't lining up, and I was very confused. I was like, this is not, it says it should be followed by 32-bit integer, right? But I'm only seeing 1 byte here, so like what's happening? And so let's see if I can find it here. I'll share it real quick.
What I do think, you and I you were just helping me out with the problem, and you're like, is there a new line at the end of the file? And I'm looking in the file editor, and I'm like, I don't think so. And I do a hex dump of it, and like, sure enough, it's there. So like this ability to jump into your files and like look at the bytes is crucial.
Yeah. I absolutely love it. I just feel like digging through some of the abstraction layers is always just loads of fun to me. But the part that was interesting here is that all integers are encoded using LEB 128, and I'll share this tab now, which is Little Endian base 128, which I guess I also talk about how to decode it here. But basically, you take the lower 7 bits of the first byte, since we're Little Endian, and if the most significant bit, so the 8th bit, is a 0, you're done. If it's a 1, that means that the encoding is continuing on. So it's a form of length encoding there. And so basically what you do is you take the 7 bits that are not, the signal of whether you're done or not, and you shift them to the left however many bytes along in the sequence you are. So, the first byte is going to be the lowest 7 bits, second byte, the next 7 bits, et cetera, et cetera. So that helps, save space in the module here. So a lot of this is just me talking about, okay, like we need to convert this to, using LEB 128. So like this is a simple example, right, where we have 0A hex. And so it's clearly right. The 8th bit is a 0. So this is just going to be 1 byte encoding this 32-bit integer.
That's a neat trick. So it knows that you're just wasting zeros on those other 3 bytes, and it drops them.
Yep, exactly.
Does that mean you have the potential to need 5 bytes if your 32-bit number is big enough?
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay.
So in the it's basically optimizing the common case, because a lot of times, what we're encoding here, for instance, is like the length of the section, and it's a lot of times can be contained in a single byte. Um, but obviously in some cases that's not the case. So anyway, yeah, I had a ton of fun with it. I think my in-laws, were like wondering where I was for a couple days because I was up in the attic, like
I'm
hunched
glad
over my
I'm not the only
computer,
one
like
that ignores their family for tech. Good,
yeah,
good job,
right,
Dad. Good job.
right, exactly. I'm like up there, like hunched over the uh, my family calls the terminal the dark place. And so like when they'll refer to when I've kind of perhaps disappeared for a bit of time, they'll just say, "Oh, he's in the dark place again." So
That's
anyway, I
good.
did spend some time in the dark place with Hexdump, and it was a lot of fun and learned a lot. So yeah, I think that's what we have coming back from holidays here. I feel like there are more things coming up, as we already mentioned. So I'm excited for our next couple of streams. But was there anything else that was kind of on your mind this week, Mike?
No, man, I think we covered it all. But as always, it's a pleasure catching up with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope you have a great weekend. It sounds like you'll have a birthday in the family, so I hope you'll have
Yeah.
a great time celebrating that.
Made a cake last night. Gonna have some fun. So we're
Awesome.
excited.
What type of cake?
Funfetti.
Okay.
Have you had these before? It's got like little sprinkles in the cake, and then there's sprinkles on the frosting.
Yeah,
Funfetti.
I think I have. I feel like when I was growing up, those were a popular one. Was that a requested or was that
It was a
on your own
requested,
volition?
and
Okay.
it's a great one for my son and I because he can crack the eggs and measure out the
Mm,
oil and water. So it's a good activity for dad and kid.
awesome. Awesome. Well, I hope you'll have a great time. Great to hang out with you as well. And if we don't chat again, I'll see you next week.
Sounds good. Take care, Dan.
All right. See you, Mike.